Okay, here we go. We're going to solve problem number 1. And how you solve problem number 1 is you just subtract the two matrices. And so that means we just subtract the two individual elements. So I just do negative 7 minus negative 1, which gives you 8. 2 minus 3, which gives you negative 1. 0 minus 8, which gives you negative 8. Negative 5 minus 3, which gives you negative 8. 9 minus 4, which gives you 5. And 9 minus 7, which gives you 2. And that would be my answer for number 1. For number 2, if you remember from before, what this just means is it just means this is a function, and w negative 7 means they would like you to plug in negative 7 into their function t. So what I would get would be negative 2 times negative 7 plus 1, meaning I'd have 14 plus 1, or that answer would be 15. That would be how you do number 2. Let's try number 3. For number 3, I want to simplify this as much as possible. So the first thing I realized is there's a square root, or a negative inside the square root. So we should remember before that you should take that out and say that's an I. Now if you remember, you probably did this a lot more in Algebra 1 and some in geometry. This square root is not in its simplest form. So we didn't practice this a ton, but to get it in its simplest form, you want to break it up. So you know what numbers multiply together to give you 24. 4 and 6 do. And you know what the square root of 4 is. The square root of 4 is 2. So really, your final answer would be this. And the reason why is 24 can be broken up into two square roots, where one of the square roots is a nice square root. The other way you can kind of do this from before is, I know some people used to make the trees, where you'd say that's like 2 and 12, and that's like 4 and 3, and that's like 2 and 2. So if you remember the factor trees, I got a pair here, so that's like 2 squared times 2 times 3, and a square root cancels that, and then the other one's left over with 6. I think this way is a little bit more natural, but if that's the way you did it from before, then that also works. Okay, so this one we're trying to solve a quadratic. You have lots of ways to solve quadratics, but this quadratic's special because it only has one variable, which means we can solve it the easiest way, which would start by adding 8 to both sides. Then we would divide by 2. Then we would get k squared equals 4. Now if you wonder, how am I going to get rid of that square root? Well, you take the square root of both sides, and you should not just get 2. Anytime you take the square root, you should get 2 answers. From before, too, you should know, oh, how many answers should I have to this problem? I should have as many answers as I have degrees. So if I have a second degree, I should have 2 answers. So just make sure that you got the 2 answers in there. Well, this is a system of equations, and what we would want to do to solve that is we'd want to do elimination, so we'd want to add these two things together. Unfortunately, if you add these two things together, nothing will cancel out. So because nothing will cancel out, what we end up needing to do is we need to times this by 3 so that these things will match. So what I will end up getting would be 6x plus 3y equals negative 9. And I will get negative 6x minus 3y is going to equal negative 2. Now we'll just add straight down. Now we'll just add straight down. The 6's will cancel, so we'll get 0 here. The other thing that will cancel would be the 3's. Those will cancel. So we're going to get 0 equals, then when we add that, we're going to get negative 11. So we're going to have 0 equals negative 11. And when you look at that, you should go, that doesn't make any sense. 0 can't be negative 11. So this thing has no solutions. Which means, if you remember, this is a line, and this is a line, so no solutions means these two lines were parallel. This slope and this slope were the same, so they did not cross, so we have no solutions. You'll get no solutions whenever these things are not equal. Okay, let's do this problem right here. So in this problem, what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to try to do elimination. I'm going to multiply the bottom by 2 to try to cancel out these tops. So we're going to get negative 8x minus 10y is equal to 24. Then I'm going to get 12x plus 10y is equal to 4. Then we're going to add them together. That would give me 4x. These would cancel, and I get 28. I would then divide by 4, and we'd get x is 7. Now once we got x is 7, now we need to find a y value. And we'd be able to find a y value by plugging in this to one of the two equations. So I'm going to plug it into this bottom one because it doesn't have any negatives. So that'd be 6 times 7 plus 5y equals 2, or 42 plus 5y equals 2, or if we subtract 42 from both sides, we get 5y equals negative 40, meaning that y is equal to negative 8. That's how I would do that problem right there. Let's try the next one. Okay, so for this matrix problem, we want to get x by itself. If you remember from before, from matrices, you can't divide a matrix. Like this is times x, so we'd like to divide a matrix. Unfortunately, we can't divide a matrix. So what you want to do is you want to take the inverse of this matrix right here. So let's call this matrix A. And we would like to take the inverse of that matrix A. So to take the inverse of that matrix A, what you need to do, so if you remember from before, we flip this and this. So I'm going to flip 1 and 1. And we make this negative here, and we make this negative here. So that's negative 1 and negative 2. We also, after that, find the determinant. And you find the determinant by doing the major axis, which is 1 times 1, minus the minor axis, which is 2 times 1. Which that would give you 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. And then we divide all the elements in here by that negative 1, meaning that our matrix would be negative 1, 1, 2, and negative 1. So that's our inverse. And once you have the inverse, what you'd like to do is times the inverse on both sides, because that will cancel that will cancel this matrix and that matrix right there. So you're going to have x equals A inverse times that matrix right there. So we're just going to times that matrix right there, which would be 6, 6, 2, 4. If you remember matrix multiplication is row by column. So when we do this, what we are going to get is we are going to get negative 6 plus 2. That's one element. Then we're going to do this row by this column, which will give me negative 6 plus 4. Then we are going to do this row by this column, which will give me 12 minus 2. Then we are going to do this row minus this column, which will give me 12 minus 4. Then we just add up all the elements, which that would be negative 4, negative 2, 8, and 8. And that would be my final answer. Real quick, this is not 8 right there. 12 minus 2 is 10. There we go. And that would be my final answer. Now it will match. Let's find the median of this data set. How I find the median of this data set is I'm just going to write them in order. I'm going to find that middle number, which the middle number of this is 7. There's my median. Done. Okay, so I have 10 students to choose between. And on this problem, I have 10 students. And then they need a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. So order does matter. So because order matters, that's a permutation, or 10, permutation 3. Okay. So for this problem right here, if we need to get into standard form, you first need to remember what standard form is, which standard form is y equals a, which stands for your slope, plus, parentheses, x minus your vertex, or your x vertex, squared plus k, which is your y vertex. So that's the basic formula for that. So our slopes remain the same. So this is like our new equation would be y equals 3. And then the next thing we'd have is we would need to find our x vertex. So if you remember from standard form, how you find your x vertex is you do negative b over 2a, which for us in this case would be 6 over 2 times 3, which is 6. So 6 over 6 is 1. So that's x minus 1 squared. And then we'd say plus the y vertex. Now the y vertex you'd find by taking your x and plugging it in for x. So that would be 3 times 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 12. Well, that would be 3 minus 6 plus 12, or negative 3 plus 12, which is 9. So again, it's just that formula from before, slope, x vertex, y vertex. That would be my final answer. Do not make this the same as this. They will not be the same. If you chose that answer choice, that is not good. Don't do that again. This would be the same as the last one, which means you would have to do this equation. Whoops, I'm already messing up my equation. So minus h squared plus k. So we got to find the x vertex and the y vertex and the slope. Slope is the same, so that's 2. The x vertex, well, that would be negative 36 divided by 4, which is negative 9. So the opposite of that is positive 9. And then we want to find our y value, so we would plug in negative 9 into all of this equation. So I'm just going to do that real fast because that would be 2 times 81. And then we would have 36 times 9, or negative 9, minus that. It's probably going to be easier to do on this calculator. So I'm going to use this other calculator. So let's do 2 times 81 plus 36 times negative 9 plus 170, and we get 8. So that should be my answer. Oop. For some reason it's not grabbing the pen again. There we go. Okay. Let's do the last one. Here there's 17 people. The order, because they just want to choose any 3, doesn't matter. So that's, if we do this, that is 17, choose 3. Okay. Just make sure if you know if the order matters, if the order doesn't matter, makes it a little bit easier to kind of do.